Chapter 7: Government Policy and International Trade. This chapter gets into how the reality of international trade deviates from the theoretical ideal of unrestricted free trade reviewed in Chapter 6. In this chapter, we report the various instruments of trade policy and review the political and economic arguments for government intervention in international trade, re-examine the economic case for free trade in light of the strategic trade policy argument, and look at the evolution of the world trading framework. While a policy of free trade may not always be the theoretically optimal policy, in practice, it is probably the best policy for a government to pursue. In particular, the long-run interests of business and consumers may be best served by strengthening international institutions such as the WTO. Given the danger that isolated protectionism might escalate into a trade war, business probably has far more to gain from government efforts to open protected markets to imports and foreign direct investment than from government efforts to protect domestic industries from foreign competition. This chapter makes the following points. Trade policies such as tariffs, subsidies, anti-dumping regulations, and local content requirements tend to be pro-producer and anti-consumer. Gains accrue to producers who are protected from foreign competitors, but consumers lose because they must pay more for imports. There are two types of arguments for government intervention in international trade: political and economic. Political arguments for intervention are concerned with protecting the interests of certain groups, often at the expense of other groups, or with promoting goals with regard to foreign policy, human rights, consumer protection, and the like. Economic arguments for intervention are about boosting the overall wealth of a nation. A common political argument for intervention is that it is necessary to protect jobs. However, political intervention often hurts consumers and it can be self-defeating. Countries sometimes argue that it is important to protect certain industries for reasons of national security. Some argue that government should use the threat to intervene in trade policy as a bargaining tool to open foreign markets. This can be a risky policy. If it fails, the result can be higher trade barriers. The infant industry argument for government intervention contends that to let manufacturing get a toehold, governments should temporarily support new industries. In practice, however, governments often end up protecting the inefficient. Strategic trade policy suggests that with subsidies, government can help domestic firms gain first-mover advantages in local industries where economies of scale are important. Government subsidies may also help domestic firms overcome barriers to entry in such industries. The problems with strategic trade policy are twofold. Such a policy may invite retaliation, in which case all will lose, and strategic trade policy may be captured by special interest groups which will distort it to their own ends. The GATT was a product of the post-war free trade movement. The GATT was successful in lowering trade barriers on manufactured goods and commodities. The move toward greater free trade under the GATT appeared to stimulate economic growth. The completion of the Uruguay round of GATT talks and the establishment of the World Trade Organization have strengthened the world trading system by extending GATT rules to services, increasing protection for intellectual property, reducing agricultural subsidies, and enhancing monitoring and enforcement mechanisms. Trade barriers act as a constraint on a firm's ability to disperse its various production activities to optimal locations around the globe. One response to trade barriers is to establish more production activities in the protected country. Business may have more to gain from government efforts to open protected markets to imports and foreign direct investment than from government efforts to protect domestic industries from foreign competition.